ventured on to other stations around the country, and then he ended up in Oregon, right?
Mhm.
And he started his own, I'll let him tell everything, but his own station there, and so he was one-man banding it there, and he's been all over the world, covering war, covering all kinds of things. So I just thought it'd be, I'll let him tell that story too, but he's traveling on his bike, motorcycle, through the United States. And so he's happened back into Yuma, and he's here this weekend, so I thought it'd be fun for you guys to hear some of his stories. He has some amazing stories. So if you have questions, ask, because he will definitely share. So once he's done, we'll do a prompt, and that's probably all we'll do today. So, and then we'll talk more about persuasive essays on Thursday. Okay, so this is Tim King.
Thank you very much. Jennifer Love Hewitt, right? It's just like her. So I grew up in Southern California. I didn't know that I would be in journalism when I was growing up necessarily. I went into the Marine Corps, and then and I was here in Yuma for that part of that. And then I went to college. I didn't graduate, but I did go. And then I got my first job when I was 24 at a little TV station. That was called TV10 on the Oregon coast. I went from there to a radio station where I actually learned how to write. I learned how to write with attributions and proper AP style writing. Then I worked for a little newspaper, several other radio stations, and then I did a documentary for PBS in Oregon that's about a B-17 bomber that crashed, and one guy survived. We brought him back 50 years later. Do you guys know there's a crashed B-17 on the mountains right out here behind the college in the Cardinal Muchachos? For those who find that interesting, you can actually go up there and see it if you are into hiking, so it's pretty cool. I did a story when I was at KYMA about that, and I lost our brand new, super expensive radio too. It was two-way with the phone and all that stuff when that was all pretty new. So basically, you know, to work in TV is totally a different background than newspaper. Most people really kind of have that targeted going through school, what they want to do. But there are many jobs still. Newspapers, I think, a lot harder to get into today than television. The internet, you know, Alison mentioned that I'm the founder of Salem News, salem-news.com in Oregon. It started out as a local news website and ended up becoming a website with 118 writers in 24 different countries, and we're human rights oriented, and I think we do a lot of important work. We have 28,000 published articles. So to get a job in TV, needless to say, it's all about having your tape, right? Did you have a tape coming in? No. You came into the assignment desk. There's so many different roles, and if you kind of have an idea of what you want to do, there are many ways to go about finding those. If you're going to shoot or report, you need a tape. I don't know what you got. What's the
English.
This is okay.
Yeah, so we're talking about writing.
Got it. Well, I didn't know how to write at first. I mean, I could write like your average person could write, but learning how to write came through the AP. When you work for a station that's associated with the AP, you can earn AP awards, which is really neat. It doesn't pay too much, but awards will definitely help you get better jobs. After coming to Yuma, I went to Las Vegas. I worked for 5 years there. I worked for their NBC and their Fox station. That was a lot of fun. And then I ended up in Portland, Oregon. TV has, it was set up in 1947. The FCC came in and said, okay, we have this new thing called television. We're going to designate a number of markets. So there are, what are there, 220 or something like that, roughly 220 markets in the U.S. But when you think about how many cities are in this country that have big populations of, say, 50,000 or over, there are just thousands and thousands of them. And those people, they kind of feel like they don't get any coverage, and they don't. Look at El Centro. How much news do you see from El Centro and Yuma every day? I wouldn't imagine you see that much because it's an hour away. You have that same problem in Orange County, California, one of the most thriving, important places in the world. The stations are all in LA. So that's what led to Salem News becoming an idea that I think that we'll see a lot more local news web operations over time. The .com thing really made it difficult because people got so excited back in the 90s, and then it all just kind of fell apart. But now the internet is back, and the newspapers and the TV stations are all feeling it every single day. My friend Matt McComb, who works at KYMA, where Alison and I used to work, told me last night, the only news he believes is new media. You know, he doesn't believe the corporate mainstream reporting because it is very flawed, and they do have their advertisers in mind. You know, it's just part of the program. I'll rattle on a little bit more about my background. I have worked as a reporter in Afghanistan and Iraq. very, very interesting things to have done. In Afghanistan, I did things like spend the night in a 1870s British castle that the Soviets had rebuilt during their war. And then the Americans and the Romanians and the Afghans are using it today. But you know, you get into the history and you learn about all the terrible things that happened there during the Soviet period. So that story, I'm trying to remember what it's called. But basically, everyone there believes that the castle is haunted. And if you spent the night there, you might believe it too. Very fascinating thing to do. I was in Afghanistan when women went to the firing range and fired the AK-47 for the first time in modern history. That was amazing. I interviewed a female Afghan general. May not even realize they existed. I mean, when women are so subjugated in a country like that. But there are, in every mix like that, you're going to find really great people that are trying to do great things. You also learn when you get into a country like that that's so third world, that it's all the same. It's just people trying to survive from day to day. They're trying to raise their children. The Taliban come into their villages at night and say, hey, if you mess with, if you work with the Americans, we're going to come in and kill whoever tomorrow. And the Americans come in during the day and they say basically the same thing. So these wars get into these impossible situations where there's not much that anyone can really do. Afghanistan was fascinating. Iraq was depressing, if I had to use one word to describe it, because I went there in '08, which was several years after the war had already started, and the people, they're just pretty battered down, so. Moving forward to the motorcycle ride that I'm doing right now, because I'm a former Marine, I learned in like 2006 that the base where I had served in Southern California is an EPA Superfund site. That means it's terribly contaminated. That's why a lot of my friends have died from cancer. And I think we're raised in this country to believe that if you serve in the military and you go to a war, your life is at risk. But the bigger truth is that if you serve in the military, your life's going to be at risk because of the exposure to the contaminants that we've been basically pouring into the groundwater at these bases for 50 years. And I look at the Marines as a microcosm of the bigger military. The Air Force and the Army, they're huge, and the Marines are this small thing. And our bases are terrible. I mean, they're really, really bad. Camp Lejeune in North Carolina is the only one where the government has been forced to admit, yes, our water causes cancer, it's a big problem. So they're actually allowing veterans to file claims for that. But there isn't that much recourse. And this also, I haven't done a lot of work on Yuma. I don't know what the Marine Corps Air Station's level of contamination is. What I tell people is that every base is contaminated. It's only a matter of how much and with what chemicals. And you can think, well, that's cool. They're the Marines. They can deal with what they chose to put themselves into. But what if you guys live on the perimeter of that base in a residential neighborhood and your water's toxic? This is what we're discovering is happening all the time. So I don't know, it's a real problem. But I've been well received. This talk has been well received all over the country. I've been as far as New York City. It was really great. I'd never seen that before. I saw major history on this trip. I spent the night at a friend's home, which is 250 years old, in a town founded in 1735. And it's called Shepherdstown, West Virginia. And my friend, you guys will find this interesting, is the only biological granddaughter of John Steinbeck, the great author, Cannery Row, East of Eden, all of this. How many of you have heard of Errol Flynn? Wow, it's a modern world, huh? Back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, one of the great American movie actors was Errol Flynn. He did pirate movies and this type of thing. His son, his name is Sean Flynn, and he ended up being a reporter in Vietnam. Similar to the work I did in Iraq and Afghanistan, only he was there for years. And he went missing, and this is the bracelet that I'm wearing is a POW MIA bracelet for Sean Flynn. Okay, I wanted to toss it out. Sean Flynn and the son of John Steinbeck IV, were great friends. And I really admire these guys, being the sons of famous rich Americans who didn't need to do anything except hang out in Hollywood and party, right? Instead, they decided to go involve themselves in the war, document what was taking place. And they broke some of the major stories in Vietnam. Every war has such major fallout and consequences. So I hope you guys are just listening to this, and those of you who are thinking about being in the military, remember what I'm telling you right now. It's very dangerous. You're going to be exposed to things you didn't expect. Do you have any questions right now? Okay. To me, it's like there are these important things. You can't buy passion, right? You have passion in your heart and your soul, or you don't. if you have passion and great curiosity, you can be a great journalist. That's what people will love about you. They'll love the fact that you're interested in what you're doing. I can't imagine doing anything else for a living. I really can't. And I've tried. I've done other things, but there's such a great feeling that goes along with believing you can help people through what you do. My group has we have a writer originally from Bangladesh, who was, his human rights were violated, he was tortured, he went through an imprisonment period. So today, his name is William Gomes. Today, William writes open letters, and he has really been well recognized. In Pakistan and India, we think we have corruption here, right? But Pakistan and India, every single politician, by and large, is corrupt. So this is an example of Salem News. We had a land activist named Baba John, and he was trying to prevent people from having their property stolen. Good people, poor people. He was arrested by ISI. In Pakistan, ISI, that's the secret police. They're notoriously bad. They torture virtually everybody that they arrest. Noam Chomsky had written an open letter the week before calling for his release. My group put an open letter out the next week, and higher government went and took Baba John out of the custody of the ISI and therefore ended his torture. When something like that happens, you feel the power and you feel like the difference you can make is real. And so that's the kind of thing that empowers us over there. When it comes to writing, I think one of my biggest challenges is working with people from these other parts of the world. They send their stories in, and the English is horrific. And I think sometimes they just toss it in Google Translator and copy it, and that's the end of that. So last night I had an article from our writer in Russia, Oleg, and it was about an American who went to Russia during the 60s, and he embraced the Soviet Union. He became a popular singer over there. I didn't know this. It was really interesting. But to try to straighten out that copy is really tough. So same thing with the guys from Pakistan. You probably know that, like in Europe, you don't always use the same way. So you go to university, you go to hospital, and then when we use they don't use it at all. So I don't know. I really enjoy being a news editor, though. That's my role besides writing and maintaining everything is being the news editor, checking copy, relying on spell check for a lot of things to speed my way through it, but then sentence structure is tough. And when you're working, you really should always have your work double checked. No matter how good you think you are, it's really, really difficult to get your work right without having somebody go over it. How many of you see yourselves working in this field? Some of you? Maybe a little bit. Again, I think it's a rewarding thing to do. For me, the writing that's the time when you can really, express the point that you're trying to make. The angle in your story, it can be driven home a number of different ways, but I believe that, taking your time. And the other thing about journalism is when you're being paid to work, you don't always have a lot of time. So you've got to learn to multitask and be very spontaneous in your reactions to things. We used to do a lot of live work at KYMA, so pull the truck up, put the mast up, go through all these different steps. Working with the AP it's a very good experience. They have the AP standard rule book. You kind of can get familiar with that. You can get that online. You can learn their way of doing things. And I don't think it's the only way to do things. But yeah, suggestions?
They're about to write a persuasive essay.
Yeah.
That's their next assignment. So maybe you can suggest, I don't know if there's something to suggest. Topics or.
Yeah. Well, when you cover a news story, you guys probably know what it is. It's the 5 W's and the H: who, what, why, where, when, and how. This is a very good standard way to try to remember to make your article rounded and that you're not leaving anything out. As far as writing essays, it's been a while, but it really hasn't. I mean, I suppose a lot of the work we would do on a daily basis qualifies that way. With internet news, brevity, just like with all news, brevity is key. The more brief and effective, the more chance that that story's going to go out, maybe go viral, something like that. I have one that's viral right now about the New York City motorcycle incident the other day. You guys probably heard about that. Bike surrounded a car driven by a Chinese-American banker. What the motorcyclist did was wrong, but when you read the mainstream accounts of it, immediately are saying things like biker gang, criminals. They're editorializing without meaning to. When I wrote my piece, I made it an op-ed, so I can kind of get away with anything that I want. It is all my opinion. I'm not standing up for the motorcyclists, what they did, but I can't believe the way that they go about this story. I mean, you've got one guy that ran down a whole bunch of people, and you've got these guys that scared that. I mean, their entire thing was intimidation. And Mr. Lean, driving the black SUV, chose to use his vehicle as a weapon. So that's the type of article that will go viral. Anytime that you take an opposing position to something in news, if you're working for a group that has somewhat of a good level of traction with Google, you can get your stories out. And then, of course, we rely on social networks like Dig and Reddit and Facebook and Twitter. And all of this is very important. You guys are in a good position. You've got, you're coming into the world at a time when, like, back in 95, 96, we talked in kilobytes, right? And then we were talking in megabytes, and now we talk in terabytes. I can't even imagine this. I couldn't imagine it 5 years ago where things would be today with technology. So, it's fantastic to find ways to use that for yourselves. I don't know, will they be doing different topics on their essays, or is there any standard
They
topic?
get to pick their topic for
Yeah.
their persuasive essay, and they should be thinking about that. And of course, have to support their
Mhm.
opinion.
Cool.
So,
One of the things that I really enjoy as a reporter in America is covering topics that other people in this country tend to ignore. I'm sure most of you all have heard of Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is an island nation. It's off the coast of India. 3 years ago, so 2010, I started receiving photographs through the email of genocide. I mean, some of the worst things you've ever imagined. Men, women, and children murdered, their bodies burned. I didn't see this on our news. I didn't see this in the New York Times. I mean, maybe a little bit. But in 2009 in Sri Lanka, up to 160,000 people were murdered. And they were murdered openly by the government. And they were, on the coast of India, over on the east side, the state is called Tamil Nadu, okay? So they're Tamil people, T-A-M-I-L. I went most of my life not knowing this, but Sri Lanka has about 15% of the population is Tamil. They're mostly Hindu and Christian. The rest of the country is Sinhala Buddhist. You would think, because we're raised with the stereotypes, again, Buddhist people, very peaceful, but not always. And so the only two genocides of the current new century that we're in were conducted by Buddhists. So this is an area where I've spent a lot of time. Last year I was flown to Baltimore. I spoke in front of 3,000 Tamil Americans about my war crime reports. The biggest thing about Sri Lanka and that war is that the government killed and eliminated as many journalists as they possibly could. If they thought you were pro-Tamil, even if you were single as Buddhist, you would get white banned. And white banning is the term in Sri Lanka for the government pulling up literally in a white van, and they'll just grab the person and throw them in and drive away. And then their body will be deposited, maybe without a head, usually like the next day. So it's so violent and brutal. And I've made a difference on this as one of the only Americans who's covered this war. And you guys can do that too if you end up in the field. You can do things that you just wouldn't believe what we have the power to do as journalists, as Americans, because everyone else in the world believes that what we're doing, is extremely important, and it is. But anyway, so then last year I started covering Burma. Burma is an island nation, it's not an island nation, pardon me, but it's in Asia. It's by Thailand, Malaysia, Vietnam, these countries. In Burma, the Muslim population has been targeted, particularly the Rohingya Muslims, who the majority of their people, just like in Sri Lanka, the majority of Tamils are in India, the majority of Rohingyas are in Bangladesh. But it's just unbelievable the rate of violence that's been taking place while U.S. journalists, by and large, for the most part, just turn their cheek. They just look the other way, if they know about it at all. And I know very, very bright people that know absolutely nothing about the things I'm telling you guys about. So if you're down the road a ways in your career and you're in journalism, remember people in the rest of the world. Do we want to take care of ourselves first? Yes. But the power that you have as an American journalist is pretty unbelievable. And in Afghanistan and Iraq, again, that was, I was an embedded journalist. I'm sure you guys have heard of the program. You go and you tell the government essentially what you want to do, and you find a unit that wants to take you. And then you go and you become part of that unit, and you go around the war, you go on missions that they go on, this type of thing. my eyes were open very much, you know. I did see some really bad things in Iraq on my very first day. I know I'm jumping back and forth, but on my first day in Iraq, we're walking over to the chow hall, and a rocket attack came in, and everyone runs for these shelters, and they're all, you know, they've been there for a while, so they're just very calm. And my friend and I are looking at each other like, wow. But that went on the whole time. In fact, the base where I was in Iraq, Balad, the nickname is Mortaritaville, to give you an idea. And the Sunni people of this community, they're paid $200 to come lob a mortar at the base or a rocket. And when people are very poor, they tend to do that type of thing, you know. I was there when, maybe you guys remember something called the Iraq Surge, and this was General Petraeus, who's in the news again right now. He decided that the best option with people we were fighting was to start paying them $300 a month. When you're a Sunni living in Iraq, that's a lot of money that can completely pay your bills and even give you a little bit of savings. I was in Iraq when they terminated the program, and I was going around with the Army as they told the Sheiks that they were terminating this program, and it just, I have all of this on tape, and I should really expand on it more someday with video, but they were just so disheartened that the Americans would come in and promise that this program would last, and then it didn't. So that's just, you know, I have so many memories of doing that. And of course, the technology, when I was in Afghanistan, the phone line was like 57K, which is like virtually a telephone line. That's what I set all of my reports back on. I think that was some of the early, you know, period of doing that for all people. YouTube didn't even exist yet, I don't think. Maybe it came out in 07, something like that. Needless to say, when you're talking about TV, newspaper, radio, you have very different writing styles, right? With radio, you get one shot and that's it. They're not going to be able to listen to it again. With newspaper or magazine, of course, they can reread the content, so you can expand a lot more, you can give a lot more. And with television, you have the ability to back up what you're saying with a picture, and that helps greatly. But you know, an audio-video linkage we talk about in television, just making everything line up, that's very important. And you know, writing succinctly and effectively, and just making it interesting, you know, expanding but not too much. I'd love to be writing the essay that you guys are going to write right now. I'm sure that would be pretty fun. Because again, I have some very strong, determined points of view on the world and different, you know, aspects of our society. And I'd love to just sit around and write about different things. In fact, I do. I mean, that is one of the things I do when I get really worked up. I'll just sit down and write a big long article. And I'm fortunate to be able to be the editor of Salem News. I can do absolutely anything that I want. And you guys will have to check it out at salem-news.com. Any questions at this point? It's okay, especially if you have any thoughts on your careers. I mean, don't hesitate to ask. There might be something I can help with.
Do you want to talk about your ride?
Yeah. Well, the motorcycle ride, it's called Operation Red Dragonfly, and the purpose of this, again, is to raise awareness of the military health considerations. All these veterans are in such bad shape, and they don't necessarily know why. People who go to the war, they're dealing with things like depleted uranium. Have you guys heard of this? Most of our bombs that we drop, the big scale bombs that the Air Force drops, they have depleted uranium. It causes, you know, it's radioactive. They call it depleted, so it's not, you know, it's not as strong as standard uranium, but it's nothing that you want to be near. In Vietnam, which is a war that, you know, it happened a long time ago, even in my world, but the fallout from that war is continuing. One of the things that took place in Vietnam was the use of Agent Orange, okay? Agent Orange is a chemical, it's a dioxin. When it's sprayed from an airplane over a jungle, the jungle will die. And so if people are using that for covert and concealment, your enemy, suddenly they're exposed. The problem is that it causes cancer. And so Americans, by and large, were just totally sprayed with this stuff. Several of our writers were around this. One of them was the daughter of an actor in Hollywood, and her dad died suddenly in 1969. So the mayor of Hollywood arranged for her to go on a USO show, and she went on touring Vietnam. She's been battling cancer all of her life because of this. So the responsibility factor from our government is very, very low. Obviously, they profit a lot from these different, you know, things that they do. In Iraq, there's chemical, it's a powder called hexavalent chromium, and there's a whole set of soldiers who were sent in to relieve contractors that were guarding this area with all these mountains of powder. the soldiers roll in and they're not informed of the health risks. The contractors are wearing masks and, all this protective gear. So it blows me away that those who fight for this country are so frequently exposed to things that they have no real way to deal with. You can't expect people at that age to really have the backgrounds to know that. I work with a doctor named Philip Levesque, who is actually a World War II vet. He's 90 years old. He became a professor of pharmacology and a forensic toxicologist and an osteopathic physician in his lifetime. And so I've been fortunate to have somebody that can educate me about these different health ramifications from this work. I was going on Agent Orange. The problem with that is that it's multi-generational. So you go to the war, you get contaminated, you come home, you have children. The children have all these different issues that go along with that. In Vietnam, they're like third or fourth generation Agent Orange contamination, birth defects, things you just wouldn't even believe. And again, that leads back to the value of the American journalist. If this is what you end up doing, and if you take an interest in this, you can actually make a difference. You can really, you can really make a difference. I just can't overemphasize the importance of any American writer taking on any subject anywhere else in the world. It really has a lot of impact. Operation Red Dragonfly has led me from California to Oregon, Washington, Idaho, all the way across through Kansas. My big event was in Missouri. I spoke in front of several hundred people at a veterans event. Everywhere I go and do this talk with veterans, I have so many people that come up and want my card afterward. They want to follow up. They want to be able to ask questions later. And two of the groups I'm representing on this trip are children of Vietnam veterans. So again, you guys, you're not that separated from these things I'm talking about. You might feel like you are, but through a number of reasons, you're really not. None of us are. And when people are contaminated on these bases, they go out into the world, they take that thumbprint with them and in their DNA, and they spread it if they have children, and the problems are just really large. So my goal is just to raise awareness and give people a chance to go in and seek health care, do whatever they can do to help themselves. If you're aware that at least you've got some type of an edge, even if you can't really completely get out of it. Questions? Come on, you guys. Okay, please.
As you said, you had your own little vending place, right?
Yes.
How do you get like sources from outside?
Sure. It helped that I went over to the Middle East and I met journalists from like Al Jazeera and these different groups. That's kind of where it began. I had a few local writers when I went on that trip. And then basically, so like today, Salem News is a magnet for everybody. They search different subjects and it brings us up, so then they'll write to us and ask their questions, or they'll become a contributing source. Not burning people, being honest, telling the truth. I mean, these things build confidence in your organization that leads more people to trusting you as a source. I mean, I've gone after a lot of different sources myself, but a lot of them have come to us. And so then I can just kind of pick and choose, I hate to say, but we have so much more every day sent to us than we can publish. And there are days that we publish 20 or 30 articles in a single day from different people. But, it's going out and getting contacts, having business cards, getting business cards, doing follow-up, cordial follow-up emails with people like that. Using Facebook. Facebook is an amazing thing. It's an amazing resource for all types of reporting, and it's a great way to promote your stories when you get them done. Brings new sets of eyes, and then maybe people favorite you, and then it goes on from there. And then one day they'll write to you and say, man, you wouldn't believe what's going on in my community. You wouldn't believe what the police did to this guy last night. And so, is that answering that a little bit? Yeah, good. The police, when I started reporting, they taught me the rule, burn me once, shame on you, burn me twice, shame on me. In other words, if you burn a cop, they're probably not going to give you information again. Are they a public servant? Yes. Are they fed by tax dollars? Yes. But that doesn't mean they have to cooperate. And in fact, we, with the government, you guys I'm sure are familiar with the FOIA, Freedom of Information Act. We have FOIA requests that are not being honored these days, and that's brand new. We didn't really expect that day to come. But the government, even though we have to pursue things the way that we believe we should, the government always has the ability to kind of stonewall you, it seems. And that goes from local police all the way up to like the Marine Corps, big level stuff. But if you're persistent and if you have a good reputation going in, usually you're going to get your questions answered. Truth is a tough thing in journalism. It shouldn't be, nothing should be ever said like that, but it's true. Brutal and blatant, honest truth is very unpopular, and yet I think it's the only thing that matters. You have to be honest. You have to tell people what's going on, and you have to give it to them in a way that allows them to understand it and believe it. I have a book that'll be coming out in a few months. I shouldn't even get too far ahead of myself. I am a co-author of a book called Betrayal. It's about the Marine Corps-based contamination, and it's about cover-up, government cover-up of big significant events. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of Ollie North. Ollie North was a Marine colonel back in the 80s. He was working with President Reagan, and we Americans discovered that our very own country was running weapons down to Nicaragua, where there was a fight between groups called the Contras, who were right-wing militia, U.S.-sponsored, and the Sandinistas, who were sort of communist-oriented peasant farmers. And the U.S. supplied the weapons so that the Contras could kill the Sandinistas. This is an amazing thing, and the way that they paid for this was through drug traffic. And this isn't speculation, this isn't theory, this is true. And in 1990, the U.S. government, I know for a fact, was still running the drugs. One of our writers, Robert Tosh Plumley, is a former CIA pilot. If you go to Salem News, you'll read his articles if you are interested. And you won't believe this guy. I tell people he's like as close to a real Forrest Gump as you could possibly get. He was president for the JFK assassination in Dallas. He was shot down over Cuba in 1957. And ultimately, as a CIA guy, walked into Fidel Castro's camp and was photographed with him by Time magazine. Really, really wild. That's the other thing about working in journalism, is you get to work around the most amazing people that have done incredible things. Their stories are unforgettable. And, you know, I feel like, again, maintaining your interest, not being too proud to show how utterly fascinating you find something to be. I mean, I've had many people tell me over the years, dude, that's what allows you to be successful in this. So, unbridled curiosity is a very, very valuable thing, and I don't think it can be overrated. Questions? I'm kind of running out of steam. I mean, I could go on about a lot of different things, but yeah. Okay, you're so welcome.
My hair up?
Mm-hmm.
Down. Thank you.
We got great comments on that picture. It's a great picture. Well, I'm gonna